Respawn Entertainment have just released a brand new Star Wars game that seems to have taken the market by surprise. I know I was fairly impressed with what Jedi Fallen Order had to offer, especially given its heavy reliance on a branding that I've never really considered myself a diehard fan of. What Fallen Order brings is quite an odd design philosophy. With extremely lengthy cutscenes and a large focus on narrative, it very well might share closer ideals to a game like Other M than the illusion of traditional Metroidvania design that is presented in a form of a vast, branching game world packed to the teeth with heavy ability gating. Keeping you on rails with the story beats until the final chapter feels like it does some disservice to the fascinatingly intricate layout that the developers have crafted, preferring to keep you engaged in a perpetual cinematic experience instead of giving leeway for imaginative exploration. We aren't here to play as intended though. With every planet comes what seems like a completely different approach to level design, with a wildly varying density of acute, obtuse angles to mess with in the planet's terrain, invisible walls guiding you or simply not being there at all, and foresight in object placement and properties. After my initial casual completion of the game with a full collection complete, I decided to see how much mileage my own approach to glitch hunting could bring out in the intended campaign progression. I want to be clear, this is by no means a comprehensive anthology of what is known at this moment in the game. This is the result of a couple weeks of blinkered play on my own part, jumping back and forth through the campaign and trying to focus on what theories lie open for the taking. There are likely some tricks that I've missed, and possibly further flexibility on some of the dead ends I'm gonna show off here. Glitches are an unavoidable anomaly in this day and age. Perhaps though, steps could have been taken, angles inspected, that were never in the process. It is a peculiar craft in that way. Now, we're going to be blitzing through the campaign from the very start, so if you want a full directory of what will be highlighted, check out the description below for planet timestamps and emphasis on the major tricks. While we start off and move through Bracca, a few things to highlight right off the bat, which we'll use some later footage just for the purpose of clear explanation. And while we do that, we're going to come to this area at the top of the slide and quickly hop around the corner here to get out of bounds. As demonstrated, once you leave the game's intended space of play, you're at the mercy of any prop surfaces that are within the currently loaded zone. These properties are usually wildly inconsistent from one another, especially between planets, but the easiest way to approach it usually entails staying with larger pieces of scenery, which abound with physical properties as a result of the same scenery being used to prevent you getting out somewhere else in the level. We can see this being used to get to what is meant to be an out-of-reach worker. Each solid surface has a secondary purpose of making up the walls of the inbounds play area. To this point, it's pretty standard. This can result in some pretty wacky navigation while you mess around, but it's ultimately restricted by the way that the game itself loads scenery. You see, the way areas store themselves in Fallen Order is by way of very specific narrow loading triggers, and a dependency on keeping distant areas visible. Proximity alone won't do it, and eventually you'll run out of scenery to traverse if you don't hit one of these triggers. To take advantage of them on a grander scale, you need a keen knowledge of what areas won't be loaded, what areas are loaded in a scenic state, which is a terrain-only load used to keep levels looking complete while you're in the distance without actually overloading the engine with objects outside of the save points, and finally what is currently stored in a completely loaded and active state. Dropping out of bounds past the loaded scenery will result in two things: either you fall all the way down to a respawn trigger, or you hit a solid surface that inhabits the underside of each area as it loads. If you end up in this state, just run in the direction of an unloaded part of the level and you'll eventually fall through. With that explained, we move forward. Now, considering the very linear long ways layout of Bracca, there isn't much to do to tangibly save time on objectives, so we're going to make our way through. A massive chunk of cutscenes later, you'll be dropped onto the closing sequences of Bracca, so you can learn navigation and combat mechanics. Again, this area is a straight line, so we're not really free to experiment meaningfully yet, even if there are oddities you can force by defying how the game wants you to load the sequence of events. That freedom creaks open ever slightly in Bogano. While this planet is fairly straightforward as well, there are a few oddities on show that you can use to your advantage. Of note, if you launch yourself over to this vine wall before seeing the cutscene introducing BD1, the map will fail to open properly, thus be unable to register the commands to let you pass the tutorial sequence for it, thus soft-locking you permanently. So don't do that. Grab BD1, learn the map basics, and take the zipline over to the crossroads with the save point. Here you'd usually move into the Hermit's Abode, get in a fight, BD1's ScompLink gets damaged, and you need to move through a cutscene and a tight bit of level to reach the end of that area. We're going to skip most of that. Turn to the vine wall you'd usually not get to until you finish the planet, and launch a running jump off the very corner of the cliff and grab the lowest portion of the wall. Now climb up to the area above. We aren't done yet, because you need to make 2 very precise jumps across the upper level, the first being much harder than the last. Now past the abode itself, you still need to run back inside and hit the wires you'd otherwise approach from the other side to activate the cutscene that unlocks BD1 proper and healing stims. It's a simple route from here, trekking down to the lower areas to unlock Wall Run, then make your way back up to the temple to advance the plot. Being sure to unlock travel to Dathomir on the way, it's notable that you can still move to other areas if you want to build up some more experience or simply run around and collect. Whatever it is you decide to do, you'll eventually move back to your ship, witness another lengthy reel of narrative, and then finally, depart to the first real open map of the game, Zeffo. As we land, we already have a time-saving trick to pull out: force slowing platforms. Certain sets of props in the world of Fallen Order have certain properties, some of them being bolted into place, some that can be moved around freely, of which a small amount of them can have force slow cast onto them. Very few objects have portability and the ability to be slowed by the force, but fortunately this giant pile of crates right at the start of Zeffo are some of them. You can move them by nudging, dashing, rolling, or charging with an attack, with each method respectively gaining more momentum, but increasing the risk you're going to toss your toy straight off the edge of the level. By getting the box over here, we can use that momentum to our advantage, slowing the box before charging it long ways into a wall. Recast slow at the appropriate time to catch the object in midair and use it as a platform to get around the giant wall, cutting off a run around the opposite loop, while also, because that area is currently in the scenic half-loaded state I mentioned earlier, keeping a mob of enemies from loading, allowing you to move on without opposition being there to get in your way. The skip we can do at the abandoned village is less an outright time save, as the area you need to traverse without it is fairly short, but a demonstration of the other type of portable object I was speaking of, the one that can be physically shoved and can't be hit with force slow. Roll the chair up the hill and use the slight height boost you can get from it to skip the loop and climb straight to the upper level. Once you've passed the village and gone through the turbine facility, you'll get to the Gusty Bluffs. We're going to use these giant spinning platforms to begin our very first substantial skip of the game. Keep in mind that as of this point, Turbine Facility and Gusty Bluffs are currently both fully loaded, with the Weathered Monument map half loaded in a scenic state. Having Weathered Monument in this state is crucial to the trick, so this maneuver can only be done from the very first wheel in Gusty Bluffs, before you move around the corner of the cliff and the upcoming area is loaded entirely. The start of this trick involves exploiting a speed overlap in the center of the spinning platform. By doing a strong attack over it as it hits this angle, you will be able to preserve speed and put it all into vertical momentum, propelling yourself way up in the air. We aren't finished yet though, because another extremely high invisible wall separates you from the out of bounds terrain. To cap the launch off, line up with the blades of the windmill and push into them as they rise to be punted even further into the air. It is possible to get a high enough initial launch to make it over, but more often than not you still just won't have the height necessary. Now that you're out of bounds, run through the surrounding terrain in the same way I do here. There are small crevices, dramatic changes in height, and outright gaps in the floor up here, so it does well to know your environment. Once you get through this hill, you'll want to make your way all the way down here before hooking back, because there is a significantly large hole for you to fall into just shy of this rise in the environment. Curve back towards the level as you make your way along, and after you've fallen down, you'll realize you're in Weathered Monument in a half-loaded state. Make your way to the gap in the wall where there would usually be a barrier requiring force push to break, and approach the edge of the loaded ground, swinging your lightsaber to ensure you don't slip off the edge into the void. Soon enough you'll hit the load trigger that usually pops when you break the wall with force push, and the internal area of the hangar will be loaded, allowing you to move around the floor and climb up to get ScompLink. The real benefit of this will be seen shortly. Now that we've got ScompLink, we have another full area skip to do. We're also going to learn about the extreme strain the game comes under when you really force yourself into positions the designers haven't accounted for. This slope here is the key to the Weathered Monument skip. Do a small jump onto the very edge of it and you should notice a brief moment where you land on the tip of the scenery. Land on that slope and execute a dash attack in the direction of this corner. Doing so will set up a high speed clip. What I believe happens here is that your dashing attack embeds you slightly into the wall while you line up with the auto grab animation point on the edge in front of you. Being inside the wall ever slightly causes an error in the coordination of the auto grab and results in the game opting out and pushing you back out the opposite side of the wall with some significant speed built up by the struggle. If you can do this and line up so a good portion of your character is above the line of the surface, clipping through will keep you embedded in the floor and the game will opt to eject you directly upward instead. Doing this with such a setup can get you enough height to make it all the way to the top of the platform with the shortcut rope down to where you once were. Make your way through the augured pulverizers until you get to the objective area, the tomb of Eilram within the windswept ruins. Once you've moved through the natural route of the level, you'll unlock Force Push and unlock the ability to navigate to Kashyyyk. There is a final puzzle here you need to do to reach the exit, but there's also another way. Move towards this fan and land on the platform using the velocity from dropping downwards. The fan boost will push you through the air towards this piece of outer scenery. Once you've landed, start making your way up the side of the temple until you've reached the peak of a particularly sharp incline. Now face downwards towards the exit and you can run along an invisible block of collision and drop down to force push open the elevator. You need to do this so the elevator ball and switch itself leaves the scenic load state. Here is where the remaining benefit of getting ScompLink Early is. Because you no longer need to go down the hill to get it, you can go straight across the ruins to the top entrance of the ice caves, then beeline straight across the lift back up to the start of Zeffo. With the first half of Zeffo complete, we're going to make a detour to Kashyyyk to obtain a necessary ability for BD1. That detour won't take as long as the game thinks it should though. At the start of Kashyyyk, you're forced into a fixed battle where you climb into a walker and use it to blast your way through. Nothing much to see here, beyond some questionable collision. Once you've cleared the area, the Mantis has landed, and you've regained control, it's time to do the next major objective skip. Fueling my own inner conspiracies that someone on the level design team is out to assist speedrunners, there are a total of 2 movable props in the entire first area of Kashyyyk. They are exactly where you want them to be. You see, once you drop down from this platform here, you're theoretically meant to be unable to get back up, needing to clear the entire Wookie liberation mission to get back to the ship, involving multiple large fights and a huge amount of extra traversal alongside waiting on cutscenes that happen throughout. Push one of the barrels off the edge of the platform to the lower level and make sure it stays there. With that done, move forward and cut through to the area where you get BD1's overcharge, a very necessary item to move forward in Zeffo. Move back to where you left the barrel. If you line up the barrel long ways against a wall, much the same way we did to get around the early gate in Zeffo, you can dash forward into it and cause it to pop up. With the right setup, you will be pushed up and on top of the barrel as it does this. The instant you clip up, you're going to do a full jump. With all of the timing correct, the barrel will fly up with you on it and you'll maintain enough height to get back onto the platform. From here, it's as simple as going back to the Mantis and leaving back to Zeffo. This more or less skips the entire back half of the Imperial Refinery once you return. Back on Zeffo, we can go straight back through the ice caves to get where we need to go, the crash site area, which is up the last elevator down here that we haven't used yet. Move straight across the water once you arrive until you get to this shore area. By facing sideways from the cliff, you can make short hops up the scenery until you're high enough to make a full jump to grab this ledge, skipping the need to run through and over the natural route to get here. Now here there's a part of this large tube that you can fall through with the right shifting of weight. Use a full jump to lodge yourself into the gap while staying as far to the left as the drop in height will allow. Eventually you'll slip down to the invisible ledge on the other side of an invisible wall. By carefully walking around the edge of the tube and clearing a gap located next to it, you have access to the crash site out of bound fringes. You can drop down far below and run around, as well as coming around to the side to hit an out of bounds swimming trigger. You can use this to explore further and even get back to the entrance to the area. I never did find a real use for this, although the theory of there being a way to get down below without needing overcharge is tempting. Beyond it lies another lineup of necessary overcharge panels which I felt would inevitably cease to be breachable. Theories aside, now that you do have overcharge, you can activate this line here so you can move forward. Once the elevator gets you to the Imperial dig site, grab zipline climb, move back up and change the topmost line, then move down and through the area to the boss fight so you can get to the tomb of Miktrull. Miktrull's tomb is quite large, but we'll be cutting a significant chunk of it out. Make your way through to the central tower area of the tomb. Once you've reached the upper area after this, you can get to an exposed outer area where you can drop down and do a lunge off the edge of a protruding bit of scenery below to skip running around the floor transition. Now, that skip I just mentioned, not necessary, because a much larger one is possible, one that doesn't even require the block you just used to get up here to be touched at all. So what you do is clear the area as necessary of pesky range troopers and climb up to this area back here. Force pushing down the wall, you'd assume this is just a standard side room with a chest in it. This one is special though. For whatever reason, there is a thin column of climbable wall at the back, one that allows you to breach the ceiling of the room. Climb up the left side of the area and jump off to hit the checkpoint located above. By falling down and respawning, you are now a full level above where you started, effectively skipping at least half of the journey to get force pull. With that done, climb over to the area where you get force pull, then make your way back up to the central area. Solve the puzzle to raise the spire, complete the tomb, and get back to the surface. Instead of moving through the Imperial base to get to the ice caves, go back down to the start of the area and exit via the front door to get back to the weathered monument. At this point of the story, you're meant to encounter a Hunstman, who locks you away from escape and captures you, sending you to be imprisoned on Eris in the underground jail. This starts a long sequence of escaping, reclaiming BD-1, and fighting a tremendously long arena battle before being picked up by the Mantis, before finally regaining the ability to navigate freely. Enter the single largest skip in this reel, the Ordo Eris Huntsman skip. For this trick, we're going to use the same concept as we did for the Weathered Monument skip, except this time we're dropping off a ledge onto our starting point instead of jumping up onto it. Land on the small ledge and start a charge into the corner, aiming to have this spot right at the front of the lunging animation. Now... So that might have happened a bit fast. What happens is you pop out the wall at high speed without getting locked to the ledge. Because of the velocity you have, you can clip through the ground of the higher out of bounds terrain and land safely on top of it. If you come out at the wrong angle, you'll smack straight into the wall in front of you and you lose all of your speed. So be sure to point the analog stick in the direction that you see me flying out by the time the lunging animation has finished. And of course, we still aren't done. Run back up the hill and do a backtrack of the route we used to get ScompLink Early, being sure to avoid the gap in the floor with the Huntsman directly under it. Jump down to the save point and be sure not to undershoot your target. Your best bet now is to save and quit, which will reload the abandoned village area properly. You can also try your luck getting across to the ship with the village still in the scenic state, but there's a good chance you'll encounter one of the many holes in the ground and waste the entire trick. With the village reloaded, run back as normal, corral the enemies near the start, and time a precise force slow on the nearby water wheel to just budge yourself back up, allowing you to be on your merry way onto the Mantis back to Kashyyyk, without ever encountering the Huntsman and without ever seeing Ordo Eris at all. Once you land on Kashyyyk, you might notice that the map objective still says head to the Mantis. Worry not, for that will be overridden shortly. Make your way down towards the Imperial Refinery. It's time to take advantage of having force pull with us, as opposed to the intended progression. Before you do this trick, make 100% sure that you've opened this door. This is incredibly important because it is the only way back through the level once you've cleared the planet. If you don't open it and hit another autosave point, your campaign will be forfeit. You will be trapped and need to restart the whole game, so be sure to do that. Swing on the vine and launch yourself backwards, angled at this point of the wall. As soon as you launch, hit force pull to maintain velocity and height until you leave the vine's trigger area. By keeping back held, you'll boost slightly off the edge of said trigger area and land either on the very top of this hallway or just a step below it. Be sure to angle away from the initial chamber past the entrance so you don't get caught below and need to fiddle your way out. Now that you're on top, you're going to move towards the end of the hallway and over the ceiling of the room behind it, the one with a purge trooper in it. If you've played this part before, you know that usually you'd defeat the trooper, Gorgara would appear behind the glass and open a way for you to shimmy through. Instead, we're going to drop into the hallway that Saw would be appearing in. Here we have a dark hallway and an untextured rectangle shooting across all at each other, for the illusion of battle from behind the glass. Note that everything in front of us is still unloaded. The loading trigger for the next area starts as you walk into the shimmying section, but it just so happens to breach through to above the hallway. Your tell is the sudden texture snap where everything behind the rectangle disappears. Now that the load is underway, you need to quickly scamper over to the left and do a full jump to get into the next section before the collision loads, which is just a moment before the scenery itself does. I don't know how consistent this loading time is between PC rigs nor the console versions of the game, but the timing remains the same for my computer. I suspect if you have a really tanky computer it might not be possible to get through before the collision is loaded, but that's yet to be seen. With that skip done, climb up the machine, overcharge the panel and move up the left side of the room, being sure to pause for a moment if the game needs a breather to catch up with the loading process. Dash your way through the next section as normal until you get to the save point. It's here where you usually run to the other side and start a full sequence of events for the Wookie liberation objective if you didn't do the barrel jump when we first arrived. However, because we have force pull, we can go straight to the right at the crossroad and make our way out through the far side of the facility, even being able to pull down a pipe shortcut to avoid needing to traverse a winding forest path with a few enemies on it. Cross the force pull ability gated area and embark towards the origin tree. In the few areas you cross while doing this objective, you do have a few options to speed things up, like lunging into the river spring for a handful of seconds moving towards the rebreather upgrade. From here, the only real time to save comes from smart climbing movement. It's at this point that the game really shows its hand in the aspect I mentioned at the start, opting out of full navigation to wedge you down a humongous spiral of areas, mainly for the benefit of cinematography. While you do this though, you'll get the Jedi flip. Slide all the way down to the origin tree, fly the bird, complete the objective, fight the boss, and eventually you'll get back down to the base of the late level path. Make your way back through the refinery towards the start of Kashyyyk. You'll pass a group of loaded crew ready for the post-robot cutscene that you'll never need to activate, and finally you'll come across that door I warned you about. With it unlocked, you're free to pile out of Kashyyyk for good and fly to the next planet, Dathomir. Dathomir is a curious planet, with the most chaotic geometry of all of them. It's no surprise that the collision itself follows the same style. While there isn't much you could ever do with the early planet gaps, it's neat to see that Dathomir's sun beaming at you through the planet itself in a landscape as chaotic under the surface as it is above. You can make your way quickly to the next objective by simply darting left once you get onto the ground floor of this section and climbing up and around to reach access to the temple. You'll soon get to a rope. Use this in the same manner that we used the one on Kashyyyk, except this time the angle is a tad tighter and you need to release pointing sideways, all while releasing and repressing force pull very quickly. Keeping the camera lined up to be directly in front of the rope when you release is ideal. Doing this will let you drop down from the upper passage and skip every single remaining part of the area, even allowing you to pick up the double saber on the way if you hadn't picked it up while climbing the tree in Kashyyyk. Meet the Wanderer and fall down to the collapsed settlement area. Here we can start on a few steps that will allow us to skip the swamp of sacrifice entirely and reach the boss guarding the climbing gear immediately. At this point, just around the corner from the raised drawbridge, there is a gap in the death plane collision. If you're just a tad to the left of this point, you will fall down further before hitting the death trigger of the drawbridge area. However, if you snake a jump around the left side of the higher trigger and then veer sharply back to the right, you can make it all the way over to the opposite side of the settlement, a place you're not meant to reach until after the boss. Unintuitively, we're going to act as if we're exiting the area entirely. Eventually you'll reach this beam as you're exposed to the outdoors of Dathomir. With a clever weave and a well spaced out double jump, you can make it all the way over the death plane here and make it out of bounds. From here, it's as simple as dropping down to the loaded swamp of sacrifice below, landing on the higher platforms right next to the hallway to the boss arena. Battle through the first encounter with the boss to get the climbing claws, then battle through the skies to defeat it. All the way back up on the surface of Dathomir, you can finally climb that final wall to get to the next temple. Long narrative sequence short, the game decks you and tells you to go to the snowy planet of Eilram in search of a kyber crystal. We're gonna do just that. Here on Eilram, we still have a few maneuvers that can speed things up. To start, we can skip a shimmying lane by jumping up the rough hill collision to make it up to the higher platform from the front. On a much larger scale though, you'll eventually come to a giant puzzle room marking the start of the Jedi Temple proper. Run over to this climbing wall and do a Jedi flip off it to face up and to the left. By making your way along the edge of these boundaries, you can slip down to a lower section with no backing. However, the jump we need to do to make it where we need to go is quite large, so budge your way up the hills, view slopes to gain small amounts of height. By jumping across to the upper sections of these out-of-bound rocks, we can jump up to the roof of the area and drop down at the edge of the area that isn't still in a half-loaded state, and make your way back to see the giant frozen wall previously blocking your way melt before your eyes. Getting closer to the kyber crystal, there is one more skip left to show off. Don't let your eyes deceive you, this trick is incredibly difficult to pull off. Knowing that it saves at least a minute of traversing all the way around the area makes it even crueler. You need to get a perfect lineup and sliding start on the icy slope, build as much speed as you possibly can, then launch yourself parallel to the invisible wall around this rocky surface. Once you get there with the right sharp turn to the right, you'll land on the collision of the wall itself and gain an opportunity to start another full double jump. Now you can get your kyber crystal and fight through the gauntlet of enemies on your way back out to the Mantis, destroying the artillery that awaits you there. At this point we're in a dead straight line approaching the final encounters of the game, which start when you go back into the temple with your new lightsaber in tow. There could very well be a way of cutting most of the detour we just did out, but at least as of this moment on the patch forcing PC version, it seems the out-of-bounds areas around the temple are pretty well enforced. As this reel wraps up, one final little oddity this game's collision bestows upon itself: box launching. With the ability to get caught between a straight edge and a wall, the correct budging movement can cause you to slip down in such a way that the game violently rejects your character, spitting them up into the air. You can use this right here in Dathomir to illustrate what I mean about the temple's boundaries. Possibly fresh collision from some of the patches keep you from moving any further in the version I'm playing, so this remains just a fun side note to end us off here. So that's as far as I got with Fallen Order. Some big skips, some little skips, whole lot of knowledge. As of the 18th of December, everything contained here still works on the updated Origin version of the game. Who knows how long that'll last though. I've noticed in a few of the laughably vague notes of the patches, whispers about fixing collision in a few places. So maybe they're already proactively going after things other people have found, or maybe it's just stuff casuals might encounter and they're not too bothered by the skips at all. This was quite a trek of a video to throw together, let alone plan for, so any love you can throw to the channel, the video, the website, Glitching as Art, the Twitter handle, it would all be appreciated. That's it, we're done. I'll see you next time.